Now, just a little warning before we begin that there will be major spoilers in this video for the latest episode of The Bad Batch, or the 11th episode of the first season, the episode called Devil's Deal. So if you have not seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, it is a really good time to click away. Okay, so for a while I've kind of been wondering and asking in my reviews of the show if maybe we'd eventually get some episodes almost entirely away from the main Bad Batch crew, more from the view or perspective of the Empire and Crosshair perhaps. Or maybe if we could even get episodes away from pretty much all of that, maybe not to the extent that the Clone Wars did it, which went full anthology style and bounced all over the place, though yeah, it still had its main or core group of characters that it followed. But I wondered if the Bad Batch series might give us what you could call offshoot episodes from time to time. And that's pretty much what we got here, despite, yes, the Bad Batch briefly showing up at one point, and that this could sort of be categorized as an Empire point of view episode. But really, this was a Hera episode, which kind of came completely out of nowhere. Even as I was watching, I was thinking to myself, are we really getting a Hera episode right now? Or maybe I should say a Syndulla family episode. But then when the Bad Batch showed up, I thought they'd sort of claim and take over the episode. But nope, they just dropped off some weapons and flew away. Now, I personally don't think this was a bad episode. I can understand if some people didn't like it. Though it should be noted, I'm a fan of Rebels and of the character Cham Syndulla, so this was at least interesting to me in that respect. And I kind of find it cool that, in a way, the first season of The Bad Batch has set in motion the eventual meeting of Hera and Kanan. We've seen these life-changing events for both of them that have set their course in life to eventually find each other, or we'll see a life-changing event for Hera, I think, which I'll get into a bit later. So this first season has almost become a setup for the show Rebels, very loosely, but it's still there. And it makes me wonder, not that I want to get too far ahead of myself, I'm enjoying the shows in the here and now, but I wonder if the animated series after The Bad Batch, and I'm going to guess Bad Batch will last, I don't know, maybe 4 seasons or so. I wonder if it could eventually be about Jacen Syndulla, the son of Hera and Kanan that we see at the end of the final episode of Rebels. And if it'll maybe sort of be a continuation of the animated shows, which all have a through line in them, and will be set post everything that's going on with The Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, and so on, that it'll be sort of a continuation of the Filoniverse, as I like to call it. And I mean, who knows for sure, this is just some fun, way too early speculation about what might come next in the world of Star Wars animation when Bad Batch is all said and done. Though I do think it makes sense, and it's the logical next place to go, since I think everything with Sabine and Ahsoka looking for Ezra, which was alluded to again in that final episode of Rebels, will likely be what the Ahsoka series is about, along with dealing with Thrawn, of course. I just don't think we'll be seeing that in animation, despite the rumors that were out there a while ago about an animated sequel to Rebels. If there was any truth to those rumors, it's that the sequel series to Rebels would be the live-action Ahsoka series. But anyway, let's get back to that life-changing event coming up for Hera, which I think we'll see in this story arc, I guess we could call it. It didn't say to be continued or anything at the end, but it was heavily implied the next episode would carry this story on. Clone Wars episodes also never said to be continued, even though many of them were parts of larger multiple episode arcs. And I must say I do wish this series had been doing that from the start, had just been doing story arcs instead of all the individual episodes we've been getting. I mean, a few single episodes here and there are fine when you have a quick story to tell, but I think Clone Wars really hit its stride when it basically stopped doing any of those, around season 3 probably, and everything became 3 or 4 episode arcs. It just felt like mini movies, and it also meant they didn't always have to rush to begin and end a story in the 23-minute window that they had. Though of course Bad Batch doesn't have to beholden itself to that window since it's on Disney Plus and not on Cartoon Network. Technically these episodes could go longer when and where needed, and some have run a few minutes longer, other than the first episode, which was of course a double episode really. But basically what I'm saying is I loved the story arcs in Clone Wars. I loved that they took the time with each story to tell it and tell it well, that they didn't feel rushed like some episodes of The Bad Batch have felt, with last week's episode being the best or worst example of this. The Bad Batch having to rescue a separatist senator and all the ramifications and realizations that could have gone along with that. I just think that needed more than a single episode to explore. Anyway, I feel like I've barely talked about the episode itself, so let's get more into that talk about Hera's impending life-changing event. And this might be a bit of a spoiler for what happens next, especially for someone who hasn't seen Rebels. So I'll put a spoiler tag up until I'm done talking about this, should you want to mute me for a minute, or you can just skip past this to when I start talking about something else. Okay, so I think it's pretty obvious we're going to see the death of Hera's mother in this next episode, or at some point in this arc, should it run more than 2 episodes. We know she's killed by the Empire at some point, and that is what basically causes the rift between Hera and Cham that we see in Rebels. So it only makes sense to set all that in motion or to show it happening here in the Bad Batch. I also find it interesting that this is a kinder, gentler Cham Syndulla from what we've seen before, and especially from what we'll see down the road. If you've read a book like Lords of the Sith, you know what I'm talking about. This Cham is tired and just doesn't want to fight anymore, but will of course be forced back into it anyway. And I loved when he told Hera that, "I hope you don't ever have to live a life like mine," when that's exactly what she's destined for. Another thing I found very interesting about this episode was the introduction of the clone trooper Hauser. Since the start of that first episode, which took place before and during Order 66 when the chips weren't active yet, I don't think we've seen a clone that still had unique looking armor, other than Rex and of course the Bad Batch themselves, though I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong and we've seen another. And there was a great comment from Shadow Sentry left on my review of the previous episode who basically pointed all this out with the Clone War armor and how it dehumanizes them again, which I absolutely agree with. The Clone War started with all clones in stark white armor, outside of the officers, of course. And as the Clone Wars series went on, we saw more and more personalization as they became more and more like individuals instead of mindless drones created just to fight. But now they're all back to that stark white armor after having that individuality robbed from them by the chips. They're all acting like mindless drones, and it's easily one of the greatest tragedies of the Clone Wars what happens to the clones themselves. And we still don't know what ultimately happens to them after the stormtroopers take over, but I'm sure this series will show us that, or at least I really hope it will. Anyway, as soon as I saw Hauser, I couldn't help but notice that there was color on his armor. It just immediately popped out at me, partly because of the comment last week, but also because it's been a while since we'd seen a clone in unique armor, again outside of Rex and the Bad Batch. And sure enough, he still seemed to have his personality. He seemed to be unsure or unhappy about a lot of the things that the Empire was doing, and I wonder if maybe his chip didn't activate. We do know Rex said that not every chip worked, so maybe he was a rare exception. And maybe because of this, I think before it's all said and done in this story arc, I think Hauser helps Hera get away, and that will probably cost him his life. I mean, he didn't want to turn her in when she was caught spying on the Imperial installation early in the episode, and then also defended her later in the episode when she was captured, saying she's just a child. Either way, it was just a nice thing to see again, a normal clone acting like they used to, one who still is apparently thinking for himself and not controlled by the chip. But like I said, I don't think his chances of survival are all that high. Another thing quickly worth noting in this episode was Hera and Omega together. It was kind of nice and strange in an interesting sort of way to just see two kids being kids in Star Wars, despite neither having what you might call anything resembling a normal life. I just thought it was a nice little scene. So all in all, I enjoyed the episode. I enjoyed getting more from the Imperial side of things, how they're lulling all these worlds or trying to lull all these worlds into a false sense of security. I like that they're trying to play the good guys and like everything's going to be fantastic now, but many just aren't buying it, and we're seeing that some on Ryloth are already gearing up for a rebellion. It was cool to see Cham Syndulla again and how he'll more than likely end up getting back into the fight. I mean, he's pretty much back into it at the end of the episode here. Even though what he seemed to want above all else was just a little peace and quiet, even if in the back of his mind, I think he was leery of the Empire too. And also, like I said before, I think it's interesting that the Bad Batch, the first season here, has kind of given us the backstory for both of Kanan and Hera, and I'm calling it now that someday we will get a show where Jacen Syndulla is the main character. However here, though myself and others probably enjoyed the episode, if you haven't seen Rebels for whatever reason, or maybe know next to nothing about that show or the characters in it, this may have been a bit confusing. You might wonder why they sort of focused on this quote-unquote random girl the whole episode, or randomly are focusing on the daughter of Cham Syndulla that maybe you remember from Clone Wars. Though I'm sure part of the hope here, again if you've never seen Rebels, is that setting up the two main characters, or two of the main characters, will pique your interest enough to go and check out that series too. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this episode. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you fall somewhere in between? How do you feel about Hera showing up and getting an episode pretty much devoted to her? Great to get her backstory, or should it be focusing elsewhere? Whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.